Reflections in Time is made possible in part by support from the UNO Alumni Association, fostering a legacy of alumni giving since 1913.
The interview series Reflections in Time was begun by the late Professor Paul Borghi more than 20 years ago. This new series continues Paul's work and is dedicated to his memory. My name is Jack Newton. I'm retired now, but I'm still active as a professor emeritus. I've been on the faculty of UN Omaha since 1960 and served for 20 years as Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. I worked closely with Professor Borghi in the development of his original interview series, and I can think of no more fitting tribute to him than to continue this work. It's kind of a cloudy day in April, early April, the year is 2004, and I have in the studio with me today Professor Janet West from the Economics Department here at UN Omaha. Janet, welcome. We're really glad to have you with us here this morning.
Delighted.
And I think we're going to have some fun with this interview. You've been here quite a while. You first came to Omaha, or UN, it wasn't UN Omaha back then, it was Omaha University,
That's
wasn't
right,
it?
that's right.
And back in 1967.
67.
Great.
Yeah.
And you've been here ever since. That's,
Right.
That's a long time.
I've really seen the campus grow, and of course it changed quite a bit when we went from being a municipal university to part of the state system.
Yes.
And of course we all
that
have
happened
questions.
shortly after you arrived on the
That's right,
scene here,
that's
so
right.
that must have been pretty exciting.
Yes.
Well, we'll have lots to talk about then today. Let's begin by talking a little bit about you, though.
Okay.
You know, you and I know each other pretty well. We spent a week on the Colorado River together. Remember that? That
Sure
wasn't
do.
too long ago.
No, that was
and
fun.
You get to know people fairly well when you're that close together for so long. I had a group of a couple dozen people from the university here, and we traveled down through the Grand Canyon for a week. That was pretty exciting. I
It really
remember
was.
that very
It was
well.
one of the highlights.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little about where you came from. Where did you start out?
Okay, I started out on the East Coast. I was born just north of New York City, and then we moved to Connecticut when I was 7, and went to a school throughout, up until 12th grade.
Where in Connecticut were you?
Westport, Connecticut.
Okay.
Yeah.
I moved here from Connecticut as well.
Oh, I thought you were from Vermont or New Hampshire.
No, my wife's from Vermont,
okay.
and I'm originally from upstate New York, but
Okay.
I worked in Connecticut in New London, and just
Okay,
before
not
I came
very
here.
far.
Right.
No, of course,
Yeah.
Connecticut's so small.
Right.
And then I wanted to get away from home for college, so I went to Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio for a year, and then basically ran out of money, and so came back and took 1 year at the Stanford branch of the University of Connecticut, and then went up on campus for 2 years and graduated in '62. And I was one of these kids who changed majors every year. And so, started off, I think, in chemistry, and then went to math, and finally ended up in history. And I didn't discover economics until my junior year, which means I didn't have any way of finishing a complete major. So I took some courses, and it really combined my interest in history with the more analytical approach that you get, of course, from math.
Did you have any history specialty as an undergraduate, like American or European?
No, it was,
Just
again,
general, huh?
it was just general, because by that time it was getting so late, it was just what's available and how can I get through.
What can I do to graduate from
Well, and
this?
especially since I was trying to get as many economics courses in. So I convinced my advisor to allow me to count I think it was a political science course as a history course, just so I could, the numbers added up was what it came down to.
Well, some people say that history is just really the history of political science anyhow.
That's right. And of course, being an economist, we think political science is really just economics. So.
Right. So you were up there in, it's Storrs,
Connecticut.
Isn't it? That's kind of a pretty part.
Oh,
of
it's gorgeous up there. And of course, it was very small. It was just simply the university at that time. And they didn't feed us on the weekends because most kids went home. And so those of us who stayed were kind of scrounging just to find sustenance on, you know, over the weekend.
So you graduated then from University of Connecticut with a history major. You were interested in economics. Where did you go from there?
Well, actually, I tell my kids that I had three choices. One was to get a teaching certificate, but I had taken one course in ed psychology from a fellow who was talking about 3-foot-tall, 30-pound 6-year-olds. And I thought, well, they don't really know much about kids. And so then the other alternative, unfortunately for women back then, was to pack it up and go into New York. And they didn't even call it, they wouldn't have even called us administrative assistants. It would have been clerical. But I couldn't type then, I can't type now, so I knew that was, and so I had the opportunity to go to graduate school in economics, and I thought, ooh, that sounds like a whole lot more fun.
Well, you must have had a fairly good background in economics to get into a graduate school in that discipline.
Well, one of my major one of the professors that I took had a contact at Michigan State, so I was lucky that they were willing to accept me.
So you ended up going from a fairly small state university in Storrs, Connecticut to what is it, the second largest in the state of Michigan?
It is now, I believe so.
I think Wayne State's bigger, but
yeah. And so, yeah, it was a very, very different.
It was very big back then.
Even in comparison, absolutely. Yeah. But it was a lot of fun. And, you know, we had a football team. We certainly didn't have the basketball team, the two basketball teams that UConn has now. But
this is, I had mentioned earlier, this is the year 2004, so those with who know the statistics historically will know that Connecticut's been doing very well lately.
That's right, especially
both men and women.
In basketball, yeah. But to go to what was really and still is, a football powerhouse at Michigan State, and you know, it was fun. It was fun to be there for those years, those 2 years.
Yeah, it's an interesting place. Okay, so you went to Michigan State. Got your master's degree in economics?
And then got married, and towards the end of finishing up my master's degree, I had a child, my first child, and we moved, because of employment for my husband, we moved down to Detroit, and then we were in that area, and I taught part-time at a very, very small Lutheran school. And then when my husband was transferred to Omaha, which of course most Easterners don't even have a clue as to where Omaha is, even though I was kind of a geography nut and still am. Again, the East Coast has no idea as to what is out there, and this would have been even more so back in the 60s.
Those of us who are transplanted from that area know that very well, but I don't think other people do. There's kind of sort of an insularity up there in the Northeast.
Right, so it's kind of a blur.
Right.
They know where Chicago is and Denver is, but anything between is sort of a blur.
That's amazing. People that I grew up with, when they thought of the far West, they'd think of Buffalo, New York.
That's right, exactly. Yeah. So then we moved here, and
well, you mentioned you taught part-time very briefly there. What led you into college teaching? How did you get interested in doing that?
That is a good question. You know, I look, my kids, because they see me as a a very goal-directed, know what I'm doing all the time. And I have to admit that an awful lot what happened was just circumstance, just opportunities, and the choices led me then, oh, well, that sounds like a lot of fun. Yeah, I think I'll try that. And so it was more that than anything that was specific.
Now, had you had experience as a graduate assistant doing teaching or anything?
Right. When I first was out at Michigan State, there was a telecourse that was broadcast all over. In fact, it was on one of the networks at about 6 o'clock in the morning.
You know, that was high tech back then.
Yeah. And so they needed someone to take care of the students, keep track of their exams, be available for answering questions. So every couple of weeks we would bring the students in, and then also in terms of testing. So I had that experience at that point, and then the following year I was actually a graduate assistant, more traditional graduate assistant, with the very, very large sections.
So that really got you started in in the college teaching area. Yeah. And then you, then as you say, you moved, and when it just fortuitously. The labor economist at the University of Omaha had left, and they had not been able to fill that particular position. Who was that? Do you remember?
I don't remember who it was.
I was trying to think myself. I should know, because back then there were so few people at the university, you knew everyone.
Right, but I don't know who I replaced. Now, there was another labor economist whose last name was Snyder, and then he also left. But we taught a lot of labor economics, primarily because we had the bootstrap program, the military, and many of them, even though they were getting their degree through the College of Continuing Studies, many of them were getting their area concentration in economics.
So all of us old-timers from back in the Omaha University days remember the bootstrap program, which was set up by Dr. Mabel L and General Criss Library to enable some of these, actually in those days, many of them from World War II, give them an opportunity, if they were in the officer corps, to complete a college degree so that they could continue on with their profession.
Right. And they were excellent students. They loved being on campus because they had the old-fashioned view of what going to college was.
Right.
And
the other students hated them. They called them curve breakers.
That's right. Absolutely.
But they were great. I enjoyed them very much.
I did too. And so it was very easy to have two labor economists at that time, and so it was a good match for me. And Roy Steele, who you remember,
Roy Steele was then the
chair of the economics department, and at that time we were in the College of Arts and Science. So we were with psychology.
Oh, I was going to mention that, yes. You weren't in the business college back then.
No.
It was an arts and science department, and I've been out of things for a couple of years now, but if I remember, one could still major in economics and earn an arts and sciences degree. Right,
and of course that's still true. We actually, but we
didn't have any. We set that up so that if you met the other requirements of the college, you worked it out with your department so that we could continue that major as one of the opportunities for students in arts and sciences.
And we have, even though now we've moved over to college business in '73. But we've always maintained our strong ties to arts and science. So we have actually 2 degrees in arts and science, 2 degrees in the College of Business, and 1 degree in the College of Continuing Studies. And I think we're the only department that has students...
That mixes things up that much.
Right.
So this position at UNO, did you start in then as what, an instructor? Or?
Yes, as an instructor.
Right. Okay.
And then was promoted and got tenure just about, I think it was '72, just before we moved into the College of Business.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was really your first full-time teaching position.
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely.
And you've been here ever since.
Right, right.
Great.
Doesn't seem possible, but
What was the university back like? What was the university like back then in 1967?
well, as you were mentioning, it was very small. We were housed in the building we're in right now, which was then the engineering building, and we were housed.
That's where the studio is.
Right,
Yeah.
right, and we were housed with sociology, so that we had very close friends both in economics and in sociology, and it was very often we would just go as a department over to the student center and have lunch together. As I recall, we didn't we didn't have scheduled classes, or there weren't very many scheduled classes between 12 and 1. And again, I think that goes back to Mabel L when he was president, because he really encouraged that kind of camaraderie.
Well, back in those days, we had a faculty lunchroom, which I've regretted.
You're right. That's right. That's right. That's right. And so we would meet.
You got to sit at a big table, and you other people sat down next to you. And I have many fast friends that I.
That's right.
To this day, that I met that way.
Yeah, from all over campus.
Right.
And you know, someone else, I'm sure, in your interview, has talked about the fact that Mabel L would not permit us, or at least he discouraged us from eating in the office. And you know, people would sneak brown bags in and put them in their file cabinets. And I wasn't here when this was going on, but supposedly he would periodically raid people's file cabinets looking for contraband coffee machines and brown bags.
Well, the reason he did that, at least the one I heard, was that there was an infestation of mice in the building, and this was one sure way to attract them. You keep a bag of food in your file cabinet.
That's right, but it was also a good way to get us all over to the faculty dining room. So,
and
yeah.
When I first came here in 1960, the student center was brand new. It had just been built, and we had instructions that we were not to eat in the student cafeteria, that we were to eat only in the faculty dining room, because the student cafeteria was rather small, and they didn't want faculty people taking up those seats that really belonged to students when we had our own dining room.
Yeah.
That was interesting.
Yeah.
But I think few people realize, outside of the academic institutions, realize how important it is to have that sort of association with other faculty members. And personally, I think it's important to associate with people in other disciplines.
Absolutely,
so that you get a lot of exchange of ideas across disciplines that you wouldn't get otherwise.
Yeah.
In fact, you mentioned having offices with another department, with sociology, and you know, we had offices in my department with the history department for a long time. Made good friends in that department.
Really, yeah.
I've heard one architect talk about plans where his idea was you have all of these offices around in a circle, a circular building, and you mix them up so that the departments are, and you all have to come to a central point, and so that's the way you get to see each other.
Yeah, and I think, well, over in the College of Business building, which I've been in since '73, it is mixed, so that you don't, except for the accountants, you have a real mixture of faculty from the various disciplines.
Now, if I remember, in the early '70s, there was a time when you didn't even have departments, wasn't there?
Yes, when at the very beginning,
when Dean
Muse was here, right? When he came, I think, in '73 or '74, and so that we had programs, and essentially we still do, because the College of Business gives one degree, and that is a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration, and then the students choose something called a specialization, which is really, it's like a program. So yeah, so that the students, because they have that core, in a sense we we have departments, but they don't function certainly like departments in your college, in the College of Arts and Science.
I always thought that was an interesting thing to do. Took a lot of courage, I think, to disestablish departments.
Yeah, right, right. But they didn't really go away.
Right,
You know, that was the thing.
Any other memories of the campus back in those days?
Yes, one of my fondest memories is that the stadium only had the permanent seats, which are on the west side of the football stadium, and so where we've got the aluminum seats at this point was just a nice grassy bank. And when we first moved here, our kids were, I think, well, they actually were not even 2 and brand new. And so as they got a little bit older, we would push the baby carriage over, because we lived pretty close, and we'd watch the game and let the kids run. And
that was fun, wasn't it?
It really
we used
was.
To do the same thing.
Yeah.
In fact, my wife had a den of Cub Scouts, and sometimes we'd take the whole group.
Right,
over.
exactly.
And that's the way, personal opinion, but that's the way I think football ought to be. Sports generally ought to be open so that the kids can enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of big-time football experience before I came here. I went to graduate school at Ohio State, and you don't get much bigger than that.
No, that's right.
Maybe Michigan State is close.
But it was more of a family environment, because the kids were more likely to be included into a lot of the activities. And part of it was we were young families. And so, you know, we were poor young families. We couldn't afford babysitters. So it was much more advantageous for us to be able to haul the kids along, and everybody's kids were there. And, you know, it was really a family activity, a picnic every Saturday as long as the weather held. And then the other is the field house, because again,
with a dirt floor back then.
Right. And then they filled in the dirt floor, but we would take the kids to the basketball games, and people were they were much freer about kids, both parents as well as the authorities. And so we would let them loose, and they'd run underneath the stands. They didn't cause any trouble, but to be in the middle of a cold winter and to have that space so that the kids could just, you know, play, run. They're, you know, in a Nebraska winter, that's something that you don't have an opportunity to do.
Well, fortunately, that still continues.
Oh, good. I haven't been to a basketball game in a while. So.
Well, we take grandchildren now. But it's you're talking about football. When my oldest grandson was the oldest one that lives in Omaha, anyhow, was in junior high, we'd take him, and he was crazy about football, and he used to go down and stand next to the tunnel where the players came out. Yeah. And as they were leaving at halftime or something, he'd go and give each of them a high five. You know? He thought this was the greatest thing to do, and they'd all smile at him and say hi.
No, you talked about faculty club or faculty dining room. One of the things I remember was George Harris, who had many different...
He was a professor of finance.
Finance, but he also was our chair in economics for a couple of years, and then he became acting dean and possibly dean of the College of Business. And what he felt also that there just wasn't a good place for faculty to interact. And so he went down to, and only the old-timers in Omaha are going to remember this name, the Prom Townhouse, and he contracted with them so that, and I'm sure it was for very little, a space. And so we could meet, just casually meet on Friday afternoons. And then the tornado came through in '75 and blew away the Prom Townhouse and blew away our faculty club.
Yeah, that was the, that's right. The Prom Townhouse is located almost up to 72nd, 70th Street or something like that, just north of Dodge. And most of it, There's still one little remnant left, and
Right.
it's called the Capitol Courts Apartments, and a lot lot of our international
That's
students
right,
live
that's
there
right,
these
yeah.
days. But that's all that's left of
I
the
know, I
Bromtown
know.
house. 1975 was that big tornado.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, what, you began teaching what, introductory economics?
Yeah, we call it principles of economics, and so both the macro, which is, you know, the broad stroke, and then the micro, which is looking more at individual firm decisions, but also labor economics, because at some point when I was at Michigan State, it may have been actually the second year. Of course, we were on the quarter system, so it was a little bit different, but I became a research assistant in the industrial relations area, and so I picked up quite a bit of knowledge in labor. So I taught labor economics, I taught collective bargaining, and also labor law. So that was really my specialty in that area. And then from there, because of my interest, then when our local chapter of the American Association of University Professors decided that they wanted to go from strictly a professional organization to a collective bargaining organization, then I became involved in the UNO AAUP. So it was directly coming out of my interest in labor economics and my knowledge about the labor laws within the state of Nebraska.
But what year was that?
The election was in '79, and then it was perpetual negotiations for about 5 or 6 years before we actually got our first contract.
Was in 1983, I remember
83, 84, something like that.
No, I remember 83 because I was traveling in China at the time, and I was with Chancellor Roskins, who was leading this group of us, and I remember him getting a cable saying that the contract had been signed, cablegram.
Well,
so that's how I remember it. Otherwise, I would have no idea. But that was a momentous occasion. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. We've been talking about your teaching. We'll come back to that because there are several things I want to talk about. But as long as we're on this track, what did your efforts involve when you were? What was involved in the work you did with the AAUP as a collective bargaining organization? Well,
before we actually got that contract, we had to go to the Commission of Industrial Relations, and they are, and they're in existence still, and they're an arbitration agency, and this is strictly for state employees, arbitration and agency, and so we, in terms of settling on what schools are comparable, what institutions, academic institutions are comparable, and then there's a formula that got established during our case that is still used, we still use today. And so I was involved in the case, in that particular case, and then after that I was...
That's a formula for determining what faculty salaries should be in order to be comparable with equivalent institutions.
Exactly. And then I was president, I was treasurer. More recently, I've done work in the area of government relations. We have a lobbyist down in the unicameral, and so I work with the lobbyist. One of the things that has worked very successfully a number of years ago, we used to have breakfasts where we would invite 3 or 4, in conjunction with the faculty senate, 3 or 4 members of the unicameral for breakfast, and then invite faculty, various faculty, faculty senate, as well as UNO AAUP faculty, as well as faculty who would have a connection with that particular senator. And one of the people I remember so well is Senator Jim Jensen, who is still in the unicameral, and I was so impressed with his sincerity and his concern for people in the low-income area. And we had faculty from social work, and so they were able to make that connection with him. And then the unicameral has gotten so busy that even on the off semester, you know, we think in semesters in the fall when they are not technically in operation, they have become so busy with various kinds of hearings that we no longer could continue that. And so then we started a program where we would invite senators to come to our classes. And one of the people I invited was Senator Pam Brown, and she came to a class that I teach. It's Introduction to Economics, and so it's not prescribed, so I can kind of do what I want to do. And it is, I can do flexibility, and one of the things, of course, I do talk about is government spending and taxation. And so she came in and she talked about her role in the unicameral and also some of the issues. This was the beginning of the problems with revenue and expenditures and some of the real tough decisions that she's had to make. And again, Jim Jensen came and talked to, I think, one of the health education classes. And so that's been very successful as well. And again, we usually try to do this in conjunction with the faculty senate because we're all faculty, and so it makes it a really good match to have both of the faculty groups represented.
You mentioned it being difficult to schedule people because the unicameral's so busy so much of the time.
Right.
One sometimes gets the impression, at least I've heard it mentioned, that in Omaha we're at a little disadvantage because, except for the people who actually live in Omaha, you're not around where the action is, that the folks in Lincoln have a kind of a leg up on us there. They can invite people to lunch very easily, or
just join them for lunch.
Say nothing of football games. So how do you see that operating?
Well, that's why we have a lobbyist, and because he's down there. I mean, he's not just our lobbyist, obviously, but he used to be a member of the unicameral, so he knows everybody, and so we've got a constant presence down there because exactly that. It was physically impossible for us, either collectively or individually, to be able to get down there. Things happen so quickly that we can't just drop our classes, obviously, and go down. But it's exactly why we got a professional lobbyist, was to do that, to help us out in that area.
And is that effective?
It is. It really is. Again, because he knows these folks so well, and he's been our lobbyist for a number of years, and so they know that he's going to keep track of issues, higher education issues. So yeah, he does a good job.
Well, I know the university likes to operate its connection with the legislature through our central administration.
Right.
But of course, you're an independent organization, as a collective bargaining organization for the UNO campus. So that doesn't really affect you. You can do what you please.
We can, but I usually work through the representatives of central administration. Ron Witham is an old friend, and you know, when he was
former member of the legislature,
right, and so the central administration has Ron and a few other folks that kind of keep track of what's going on, and so I get periodic emails, just updates. You know, this is something that is happening. Watch out for it. And then what I try to do is to notify the folks up here, the faculty up here, to contact their senator.
Sure.
And we give very specific instructions. You do not use the university email system, and you do not use your office phone. So, you know, you do it personally.
The right way.
Yeah, right. So, but yeah, we work in conjunction. It's particularly with the budget situation. I think one of the good things about the problem is that it's really pulled the 4 campuses together, so that there used to be certainly more competition between UNO and UNL, and with us all suffering from the cuts, I think we see ourselves, and Kearney as well in the Med Center, more as a total university, and we've got to support each other so that we can make it through these more difficult times. And I think that's going to be a real positive. That's not going to end when the funds flow a little bit more. I think that we realize, yes, we're all in it together, and we have to work together.
Well, on that topic, and I think maybe it's time for us to turn to something else shortly, but on that topic, I've heard the comments that before UNO had collective bargaining, the regents were always very careful to treat the 2 campuses, University of Nebraska-Lincoln and UNO, alike. That if one got a percentage salary increase, the other got identical percentages, and that as soon as collective bargaining came in, they felt free to treat them differently because UNO salaries were bargained for. And
Right,
UNO
right. But when you had the salary differential that you had between UNO and UNL, a 2% increase on UNO's campus was not nearly as much money as the 2% increase on the Lincoln campus. And what it was doing was, in fact, making the absolute differential between the faculty salaries larger and larger. And that was one of the things that prompted bringing the UNO AUP in as a collective bargaining agent. But the real one was in terms of a merit system that the Faculty Senate was, in a sense, forced to accept, and everybody felt that it was just not equitable in any stretch of the imagination.
Well,
and so
okay. I was on the Faculty Senate back
then.
That merit system was developed by a history professor, Professor Petrowski, and was passed by the Faculty Senate by a free vote.
And I wasn't on the Faculty Senate, so I have to. But there, anyway, there were a lot of faculty, and maybe it
I understand what
theoretically, it may have looked great on paper, but when it was put into effect,
well, it had some stuff built into it that presumed that you were going to get salary increases greater than that inflation. When you didn't, the system didn't work.
Right.
So I'm aware of those. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit more about your teaching, because you've done some interesting things going back, way back when you, not too long after you first came here. Didn't you get involved with, what was it, VISTA? Service learning sort of program?
Well, they're now calling it service learning, which is to have the students have an experience in the community. And in some cases, I think they get credit. In some cases, it's a part of a course rather than a whole course. And this was a program that was actually a grant that was from a professor of education down at UNL. And it was, in fact, to set up a program where students would be out doing community service for an entire semester. And so I was a co-director. The other co-director was Mike Adams, who is from the Adams family in Omaha and very prominent politically as well as in the social area. And so we set up this program, and students would get a full semester's worth of credit, and we worked it out in such a way that, you know, 3 hours might be in economics credit, 3 hours might be in sociology. And so they were out in the community and learning about the problems of these were primarily service agencies helping the poor, very often in the minority area. And so it was to give them an experience in terms of what's going on in an area of Omaha that they might not have had been exposed to.
And VISTA was a program funded by the federal
government, so that unlike the...
You don't happen to remember what the acronym VISTA stands for?
Voluntary, I don't know. But they actually did, unlike the service learning now, they actually got, it was at least minimum wage for this experience. And so, yeah, and as I say, it was a very successful program. I still have contact with some of the students that were involved in it. I'll see them around town, and it's just amazing.
In your college, do you still maintain any service learning type programs?
The only thing that the College of Business has is the internships. And I do the internships for the College of or the Department of Economics. And I would love to be able to do more of a kind of a service learning approach such as it was true back then in terms of placing students in agencies, particularly agencies that would have something to do with economics, economic development agencies or something like that. But again, so many of our students work to put themselves through school, so if it meant that this would not permit them to be able to have that part-time job, it wouldn't work. And I know my chair and I have spoken about if there would be some way of getting some kind of funding for students in the College of Business or any place where we could tap at least minimum wage for 20 hours a week so that they could in fact have that kind of experience. It'd be wonderful support for the agencies, but it would be great experience for the students as well.
You've done a couple of other interesting things too in your teaching. One of them we were talking about before we started this interview today was that freshman year experience.
Right. Again, a colleague, Judy Watanabe from the accounting department, she for years taught the beginning accounting course, and I for years taught the beginning economics course. And we got our heads together because there was activity on campus through University Vision in terms of freshman year experience. And what we decided was that by the time these CBA students got to be sophomores, many times they had dug themselves in terms of their grade point average.
Tell me what freshman year experience means.
It means giving them information, giving them experiences at the very beginning to help them be successful in college, make good decisions, and not just simply in terms of in the College of Business, but sometimes we would have students, and because we would give them some assessments, Myers-Briggs, Campbell, which is more of a career-oriented assessment, they would realize after taking this course that, gee, maybe they don't belong in business, maybe they belong over in history or in the College of Education. So we would give...
So you use some sort of a test instrument to find out what their interest
they really had an interest in, because, and this is particularly true for many of the UNO students who are first-generation college students.
And do you have things like, you know, how to study or how to manage your time?
Some of that, yeah, some of that. We would have a unit for each of the major areas of business and projects, and one of the most fun was at the end we would put them in groups, because it was also, because of being a commuter campus, getting to know other students. And so we had a lot of group projects. So we would have them write up a business plan which of course anybody who wants to go into an entrepreneurial business has to. Now, it was a freshman level business plan, and they could do it on any business. So we had paintball, and we had cafes, internet cafes, you know, depending upon what was going on. And then they would have to put a presentation together, and for the class. And
now, does this still go on, or is there still a freshman year experience course?
Well, unfortunately, because of the budget cuts, it used to be a required course in the College of Business, and now we've gone from about 8 sections a semester to 2 sections, and it's primarily when kids say, gee, I would like to take something like a Intro to Business course. But yeah.
Do you try and encourage students who are more, what's the word, at risk to take it?
Yes, absolutely.
Those who are likely, you think maybe more likely to have trouble with
Right. And of course the university also has a program now that many of the pre-existing programs have not made it through the budget cuts. But again, I'll see students. In fact, I just saw a student a couple of nights ago, and you know, she was, oh, gee, that course was so much fun. I met people, and of course that was what it was all about. And I'll see students in the hallway, and we tried to get to know each one of them personally. So what we did was we had a personal interview with every student.
Great.
So,
well, time's going by pretty quickly here. One thing I want to be sure and talk about, though, is you've done a number of things internationally, and one of the academic things that you've done particularly is this program you developed in Ireland. Can you tell me a little about that?
Yeah. We just came back. This is our 4th year. We started about 5.5 years ago. And Becky Morris, who is a professor in the management area, and she and I dreamt this thing up. And what we do is we take students to Ireland over spring break. And our feeling is that most UNO students, again, simply can't do semester abroad. But they need to have an international experience. The world is so small, they need to have an international experience. So it is, what our primary theme is to visit American companies that are located in Ireland, and then Irish companies that export products to the U.S. And so
how did you make those contacts?
Just basically by hook or by crook. I mean, it's just amazing. For 2 of the companies that we visited the first year were Gateway Computers, and they were there just for 1 year, and then Avaya, where the sister plant is right here in Omaha. And so we were able to make those contacts, and when we went to the Avaya facility, we would see those great big spools because they're producing the wires, and it would say Omaha Works. And when we talked to the people, they had been back and forth to Omaha. So, and then we just got on the net and said, okay, now what else sounds interesting? And of course you've got the 3 obvious ones in terms of Jameson's Distillery and Guinness.
Those should be pretty popular.
Yes, and then the most popular one, though, is the Waterford tour. So we get them on great big buses and
go and watch glass being cut.
That's right. And then we get a lecture from the head of their marketing department. And so it dovetails so perfectly with what the students are learning in their classes. And then it just, again, fortuitously, we found out 3 years ago that that Omaha had a new sister city, which is Naas in Ireland. It's about 25 miles outside of Dublin, and so we were the first group to visit this new sister city, and so we were able. We've done that for 2 years.
You don't have any contact with Motorola there, do you?
No. But we're always looking, because I think after about 2 times, we kind of wear out our welcome, because these people the companies are so generous. We went to PayPal, though. They just set up a new operation. So that was a new one this year. And we are going to look into one of the pharmaceutical companies, because they're there are a number of American companies that are located in the
I asked
Dublin
about
area.
Motorola because I have a son who works for Motorola in Austin, Texas.
Okay.
And he supervises computer programmers all over the world, and a lot of them are in Ireland.
Aha,
And,
see, I'll have to get hold of him for next year. Yeah, no, it's, and we go to Intel. We didn't go this year, but we've twice gone to Intel. And the question that we ask when we go to a company like Intel is, why Ireland? And the first answer is because they speak English. And if they want to get the engineers together, they don't have any problem. The engineers can talk directly to one another. They don't have to go through a translator. And then initially, 10 years ago, the wages were relatively low. And the other thing is that they have a slightly different educational emphasis, and that is of course they've got what would be like our K through 12, and the kids usually have more science and math than our kids have. But then they push a lot of kids into what would be a technical community college, whereas our community colleges have some technical, but it's mostly academics.
Did you ever have any contact with the Irish Institute for European Studies?
No, no.
You know what I'm talking about?
No, I'm not even.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's in Belgium.
Okay.
It's an old monastery there that was owned by Irish monks originally and was given to the government of Ireland. And they try and teach. Well, they use it to educate Irish people as to what's going on in Europe and how to do business in Europe with the EU. And, but I know I lived there for about 6 weeks a number of years ago now when I was with the Nebraska semester abroad. I went as a faculty member with that, and one of the places we stayed was in their dormitories there.
Okay,
and it's a fascinating place.
Yeah. Well, we cut the travel down as much as possible. So when we get there, we go into the hotel, we stay in the hotel in Dublin, and we go out 3 times. We have buses that go out 3 days of the 9 days that we're there. But the students will often say, well, we're so close to England, can't we go over to England? No, we're going to stay in Ireland, because we just don't want to have students all over the place.
Well, people who haven't been there don't realize that it's a fairly small island. You can go most any place pretty easily.
Yeah, it's about the size of West Virginia.
Right.
And so, yeah, on the train you can get just about any place in 2.5 or 3 hours.
So your students really seem to benefit from that.
Oh, they just love it. And yes, we had a student a few years ago, and some of these are MBAs and some of them are undergraduates. And this was a woman who actually, I think, was from the Ukraine, but was here taking the MBA. And she had taken the production courses, and then when we went to Avaya, which is a production plant, and she said, now I see what we were supposed to learn in these production courses. So yeah, and then of course when you go and hear the director of marketing at Waterford, and what is their marketing plan for the next 5 years, yeah, again, it makes it that they're not just learning this stuff in the classroom, but people are actually doing what they're learning.
Well, you know, our time's going by pretty quickly here. I'd like to spend a little time, though. We could talk about international things forever, because I really love to do that, but I think maybe we'd better spend a little time talking about people, because there's so many interesting people on this campus. And you've been here long enough so that I'm sure you've known a lot of them. We've mentioned a few already in our discussions. Any memories of people at the university? It doesn't have to be administrators or faculty, students, employees, anyone in particular that you'd
well, probably one of my most favorite people is Ada Gossick, who was the custodian in
Oh, really?
the College of Business, and she was just an absolute favorite person.
Well, now, how
within
did you
that.
come in contact with her? Was she there during the day? So many of the
Yes,
custodial
yes,
people are only there
yes.
hours when we're not there.
No, she was there during the day, and she, you know, primarily worked on our 4th floor, which is the dean's office, but everybody loved her so.
Yeah.
And when she retired, we had a big party for her, and she was so good to us and did such a good job, and we all loved her so much. And
Yeah, that's great, and it's I've seen that in other buildings too, in other colleges, where there's always there's been somebody who everybody knows because because they have so much contact with them and because they've had so much help over the years.
That's right. That's right. And then another person is a colleague who came actually a couple of years before I did, and that's Don Connell, and in my department. And I really hadn't had much experience. As I say, I had taught part-time in Detroit, but had not taught at certainly any institution this large. And so he really was so helpful in terms of just letting me know how do you do it, you know, both in terms of teaching and, you know, the testing, and, you know, again, it was such a different
Yeah, it
system.
really helps to have a mentor like that, doesn't it?
It does,
Who will
it does.
help you along and get you started in things.
And he was so knowledgeable. He was knowledgeable about everything. He was a real Renaissance man. So, you know, if I had a problem with my car, Don would diagnose it. If I had a problem with my body, Don would diagnose it, you know. So it was just wonderful. I miss him so much. He died a few years ago, but he was such a good colleague for so many years. So I really remember him and miss him as well.
Well, we have about another minute here. Anybody else that you'd like to mention here? Well,
it's many students that you know, and it's hard to pick one of them out. But when I'll tell you a funny story though, and I can't tell you who the student is, but I was down at Walgreens probably about 6 months ago, and we were in the parking lot, and we sort of crossed eyes, and then we were in the store, and then we came out at the same time, and the student came up and he said, leakages. He says, no. He says, aren't you Professor West? I said, yes. And he said, leakages and injections. And so that's what he remembered from the course. So.
Well, I'm so glad to have had a chance to talk with you today. We've had, I think we've had a little bit of fun here, and we've talked about a lot of things, so I want to thank you for coming in today.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's very good of you. And I want to thank our audience for joining us today in a visit with Professor Janet West, longtime faculty member in economics in the College of Business Administration. We've been taking a look at some of the history of UN Omaha as seen through the eyes of the history makers. This is Jack Newton inviting you to join us again in the series we call Reflections in Time.
Reflections in Time is made possible in part by support from the UNO Alumni Association, fostering a legacy of alumni giving since 1913.